Okay, welcome back to week 4, Americana, Cultural Phenomena in Contemporary American Society. So let's start today's lesson by going over our biographical reading of Norman Rockwell. And this is from the Norman Rockwell Museum. They have their own website with a lot of his artistic illustrations. So one of the things he quotes, he says, "Without thinking too much about it in a specific term, I was showing the America I knew and observed to others who might not have noticed." So Norman Rockwell is born in New York City in 1894, and he always wanted to be an artist. And at the age of 14, Rockwell entered in art classes at the New York School of Art. 2 years later, in 1910, he left high school to study art at the National Academy of Design. Rockwell found success early. He painted his first commission of 4 Christmas cards before his 16th birthday. While still in his teens, he was hired as art director of Boy's Life, the official publication of Boy Scouts of America, and began a successful freelance career illustrating a variety of young people's publications. At age 21, Rockwell's family moved to New Rochelle, New York. Here, Rockwell set up a studio with the cartoonist Clyde Forsyth and produced work for such magazines as Life, Literary Digest, and Country Gentleman. In 1916, at 22, painted his first cover for the Saturday Evening Post. The magazine, considered by Rockwell to be the, quote, greatest show window in America. Over the next 47 years, another 321 Rockwell magazine covers would appear on the Post. The 1930s and 40s are generally considered to be the most fruitful decades of Rockwell's career. 1943, inspired by President Franklin Roosevelt's address to Congress, Rockwell painted the 4 Freedoms paintings. They were reproduced in 4 consecutive issues of the Saturday Evening Post with essays by contemporary writers. Rockwell's interpretation of freedom of speech, freedom to worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear proved to be enormously popular. The works toured the United States in an exhibition that was jointly sponsored by the Post magazine and the United States Treasury Department, and through the sale of war bonds raised more than $130 million for the war effort. Some critics dismiss him for not having real artistic merit, but Rockwell's reasons for painting what he did were grounded in the world that was around him. Maybe as I grew up and found the world wasn't the perfect place I had thought it to be, I unconsciously decided that if it wasn't an ideal world, it should be, and so painted only the ideal aspects of it, he once said. So generally speaking, he paints kind of rural, romantic versions, country life, small town, growing up, some of his major themes. But he departs from that in one particular painting called Ruby Bridges. One such socially charged piece entitled The Problem We All Live With appeared on the cover of Look magazine in 1964. It was inspired by 6-year-old Ruby Bridges' integration of New Orleans, William Frantz Public School in 1960. The work shows a small African-American girl flanked by faceless U.S. Marshals as she walked past a wall bearing the marks of a smashed tomato and a scrawled racial epitaph. The Problem We All Live With generated hate mail for the artist, known for depicting romanticized versions of American life. But it became one of the most important pieces of his career. It was the first painting acquired by the Norman Rockwell Museum in 1975 and later hung in the White House during President Barack Obama's first term. Quick sidebar note, most of the characters in Rockwell's paintings were actual people living in and around his last studio in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. Okay, so that's our little piece on Norman Rockwell. And we'll move on to our next slide. What we're going to do from here is to take a look at items of popular culture from the past and show their transition into how they ended up in today's life. Okay, so this slide, the material for this slide comes from Cengage.com. It's a timeline of America's popular culture. So to have popular culture, there needs to be a middle class with disposable income. So this is pre-Revolutionary War times. And of course, America is still an English colony, not truly Americana popular culture until well after the Revolutionary War. But nevertheless, people during these times that had disposable income, and some did, but not all, these were the kinds of things that they did for entertainment, recreation, free time, that sort of thing. So one of the things in the house for entertainment were board games. And these are still present today. Card games, a game called cribbage, which is a wooden board with pegs in it, and by counting up your card totals, you get to move your pegs along a track. Another game was called backgammon. Both of these from Europe. Backgammon had been around for hundreds of years, so nothing new here. Um, Girls' dolls. Now, the less fortunate rural farmland areas, the kids had toys, but they were, made at home and made out of the raw materials that were around the farm. However, those with the means imported dolls from England and Europe. Girls also had these little tea sets where they'd play with their dolls and maybe have a doll house or a doll entertainment room or tea room, that sort of thing. There were theaters in the city areas in Boston and Philadelphia and New York that would have plays and music and performances. Music was available everywhere and was performed in a tavern or a coffee house, at street fairs, on the stage, and in the home. And the main instrument was the fiddle, which is a kind of violin. There were dance schools. Dancing was very popular then for parties. And, of course, horse racing. So that's a little bit on our slide of where America starts from, its English colonial roots, as an extension of probably English popular culture, but here in America. Okay, so this slide information comes from The Birth of America, American Culture, Digital History. And in 1783, the first daily newspaper, the Pennsylvania Evening Post, began to be published. Now, there were newspapers before this. They were expensive. Most of them were business and trade related. Things like the shipping times of when ships were going to be landing at different ports, or a piracy report, those kinds of things, mostly published for businessmen and kind of out of reach for the common person. But in 1783, that changes, and newspapers were print at an affordable price so that anyone who could read could buy a copy. The dime in 1860 in Oswego, New York, a printer named Erastus Beadley issued his first dime novel, Malasaka, the Indian Wife. So we're starting to get these short printed novels and books available to the general public. So the article goes on to say, a freewheeling, irreverent spirit pervaded American popular culture before the American Civil War. A spirit typified by P.T. Barnum, 19th century America's most famous purveyor of popular entertainment. A Connecticut Yankee born in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1810, Barnum is reputed to have said that, quote, "there's a sucker born every minute." A staunch advocate of temperance, anti-slavery, and women's rights, Bonham made a fortune through pioneering campaigns of advertising and self-promotion. A critic said that an appropriate motto for Bonham would be, "Lie, swindle as much as you please, but be sure you read your Bible and drink no brandy." Okay, so P.T. Bonham later becomes famous for his circus that travels throughout the United States, bringing entertainment to very small rural places. It's a little bit of a beginning for our true Americana popular culture. So beginning in 1825, when an obelisk was erected at Bunker Hill in Boston to commemorate the Revolutionary War battle, Americans started to construct patriotic monuments. Around the same time, homeowners began to beautify their home with lawns and landscaping, while cities established the nation's first urban parks. Construction of Mount Auburn Cemetery in the 1830s in a pastoral setting outside Boston marked the beginning of the modern park cemetery, where the living could commune with the spirit of the dead. Though the site was initially popular because it was a green space that could be used as a picnic ground. These beautification campaigns represented a response to the urban and industrial growth of cities that had already threatened to destroy the physical beauty of city environments. Okay, so we're going to start talking about some different products, where they started, and where they've ended up in today's American popular culture. This is from the Smithsonian Magazine. The first breakfast cereal, Granula, had to be soaked before being eaten. If you take a look at the picture, it's a pretty raw, rough-looking breakfast cereal. The inventor of the first breakfast cereal, Granula, by James Caleb Jackson in 1863, wasn't much of anything like the cereal that we eat today. The first manufactured breakfast cereal in 1863 by a doctor and health reformer. The health spa he ran in upstate New York, he began experimenting with cold cereal as a cure for illness. It was at that time the standard American breakfast was a cholesterol-laden hot meal of eggs, bacon, sausage, and beef or chicken, plus cooked grains, hot cereal, biscuits, toast, butter, and jammed. And it was actually part of the British tradition of a lavish breakfast to fortify the gentry for a day of sport. Although Jackson's concoction didn't take off, they write, the idea of a cold cereal reached the ears of another pure food advocate, John Harvey Kellogg, who ran his own health spa. in the late 1870s, he started making his own granula out of a mixture of wheat flour, oatmeal, and cornmeal. Jackson sued Kellogg, who then renamed his take on breakfast cereal to granola, which we know it as today. Working with his commercially minded brother, William Kellogg, he founded a cereal empire that still bears the Kellogg name today. And you can find many of Kellogg's products in the supermarket in America today. It kind of progressed from there. American people today are on the go. They really don't stop to cook themselves or even eat a quick breakfast. They're usually out the door, in the car, on their way to Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, and usually in their, say, lunch packet, they would have these kind of semi-granola bars or fruit bars that they would eat in the morning on their way to the office. And we see that so much in my supermarket here in my hometown. A whole aisle is devoted to these quick snack breakfast bars. Some of them with fruit, nuts, you name it. All healthy, all quick, nutritious. Convenience is the name of the game. Okay, so that's it on our cereal piece. Okay, so in this slide here, we're going to talk about radio. And this is by Mervyn Fry, the cat's whisker, official voice of the Canadian Vintage Wireless Association, Volume 3, Number 1, March 1973. Okay, so yes, it was a Canadian, Reginald R.B. Fessenden, who was recognized as the father of radio and as the first to actually transmit the sound of the human voice without wires. So the first radio broadcast ever in the world's history was made by Fessenden on Christmas Eve, 1906, when he beamed a Christmas concert to the astonished crews of the ships of the United Fruit Company out in the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. Beamed out of a 400-foot tower of the transmitting shack at Brant Rock, Massachusetts, on the Atlantic coast, this program commenced at 9 o'clock with CQ, 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 meaning general call to all stations within range, sent out in Morse code. So this broadcasting area was actually about 8 miles from my home here in Marshfield, Massachusetts. Over the microphone, Reginald himself gave a brief speech as to the program to follow. This was immediately followed by one of the operators switching on the Edison phonograph and a solo voice singing Handel Largo. Fessenden grabbed his violin and fiddled through O Holy Night, singing as well as playing. Helen, his wife, and his secretary, Miss Bent, endeavored to read parts of the Bible. Concluding the program, Fessenden wished his listeners a Merry Christmas. From the album by Josh Ritter. Prior to the emergence of television as dominant entertainment medium in the 50s, families gathered to listen to the home radio in the evening. The golden age of radio, also known as the old-time radio era, was an era of radio in the United States where it was the dominant electronic home entertainment medium. It began with the birth of commercial radio broadcasting in the early 1920s and lasted through the 1950s, when television gradually superseded radio as the medium of choice for scripted programming, variety, and dramatic shows. Radio was the first broadcast medium, and during this period, people regularly tuned into their favorite radio programs, and families gathered to listen to the home radio in the evening. According to a 1947 C.E. Hooper survey, 82 out of 100 Americans were found to be radio listeners. A variety of new entertainment formats and genres were created for this new medium, many of which later migrated to television. Radio plays, mystery series, soap operas, quiz shows, talent shows, daytime and evening variety hours, situation comedies, play-by-play sports, children's shows, cooking shows, and more. 82% of American homes would own a radio by 1940. During the 1950s, automobile manufacturers began offering car radios as a standard accessory. And radio received a boost as Americans listened to stations as they drove to and from work. And that still happens today. People, especially with long commutes from the suburbs into the city, usually listen to the radio for updates of the traffic report, maybe taking alternative routes depending on how bad the traffic is that day. A new format, all news radio, became popular on the AM band in major cities in the late 1960s. Talk radio, although it had a small following in the cities, did not achieve mainstream popularity until the 1980s. Internet radio, digital music players, and streaming capable smartphones are a challenge to traditional terrestrial AM and FM radio today. Okay, so it all starts back. The radios back in those early 1920s were a great big, huge wooden box, lots of tubes. Eventually, we get the transistor radio. People would take that to the beach, to picnics. Car radios, as we talked about, that eventually gets developed into CD players, and now it's you don't even need it. You can get it all on the internet. Okay, so that's a little bit about where radio began and how it ended up today. Okay, so next is the automobile. Of course, not invented here, but certainly became available to the common man here. We can thank Ford for that. So in 1893, Charles Doraya and J. Frank, who were bicycle mechanics at the time, designed the first successful American gasoline automobile. In 1913, Ford introduced the assembly line, allowing the mass production of automobiles. The U.S. produced more than 3/4 of the world's motor vehicles that year. The first car was called the Model T Ford, and this is from Put the World on Wheels. Let's see, over 15 million were built between 1908 and 1927. The starting price was a little over $800 for what was called the runabout model. But by 1925, the price had dropped to $260. It was called the Tin Lizzie. And this became available for most people. So we see a huge surge in people giving up their horse and buggy and buying cars. Now, the chassis, or the not the engine part of the car, but where you sit and so forth, was just a transfer design of a horse and buggy carriage. It really didn't change that much initially. We talked about cars a little bit back in our other American Lit 4 class. There were no licenses, there were no street lights, there were no stop signs. There was still horse and buggy on dirt roads. It became a complete chaos. Okay. Simplicity, performance, reliability. Those were the magic ingredients baked into Henry Ford's wildly successful Model T, a technical and commercial triumph that not only democratized driving for the masses, but in so doing also helped transform America's landscape and culture. Farms were no longer dramatically isolated from one another. Street paving accelerated, and the building of the nation's vast network of roadways began in earnest. Street lights, road signs, and a whole new array of roadside businesses began, including the now ubiquitous gas station. So this really changed the whole layout of America. And then there was Henry Ford's decision to offer Model T in any color as long as it was black. So the reason for that is that black paint is cheaper. And he would say you can have your car, you can buy your car in any color you want as long as the color is black. By 1914, the Model T's success had made Henry Ford rich, but he had a problem. The moving assembly line he had pioneered should have made it possible to sell cars at even lower prices. But the assembly line's repetitive tasks proved unattractive at a wage of about $2.25 per 9-hour workday. worker turnover killed productivity. That means people quit. Sometimes workers just walked away from their stations, bringing the entire mechanical mass production line to a stop. This is from history.com. Ford's solution was innovative. He raised the wage to $5 per day and cut the workday to 8 hours. Now, this kind of translates later into the 8-hour workday. One day after it was announced, a crowd estimated of 10,000 people showed up at the Ford plant looking for $5 a day employment. That solved the turnover problem, letting the assembly line run efficiently. Ultimately, with its production facility that, figuratively speaking, sent iron ore in one side and finished cars out the other, Ford completely dominated the $300 car market. The most sold car in America, I was kind of surprised at this, is actually the Ford F-Series pickup truck. Now, when you think about cars, why would the pickup truck, which sold actually a little under 1 million units since its beginning, be the most popular vehicle for Americans? And first, America does have a huge agricultural base. Two, recently, within the last 20 years, we find that the consumer wanted a vehicle that not only took them from point A to point B, but also had to have some utilitarian, positive attributes to it. Because Americans do something called do-it-yourself around their houses. They try to fix things on their own. If you want to buy lumber and building materials, that's not going to fit in your nice little car. So the pickup truck was the solution for that. It's also the favorite vehicle for tradesmen, companies doing short haul shipping. So the car or vehicle that is sold the most in the United States is the Ford F-Series pickup truck. Okay, so that's our little bit on Henry Ford and the automobile. Okay, so our next slide is about the movies, and this is from an article from southtree.com, How the Movies Have Changed a Timeline, by Christian Romer. And in 1894, technically the first movie is shown in Indiana. And it was about 3 seconds long. It was a series of single snapshots in progression of a horse running. In 1895, the first film scores were released. In 1902, the first full-time cinema is opened in Los Angeles. 1905, the first Nickelodeon opens in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation, the first feature-length film, forces Nickelodeons to charge more for admission. This is from National Public Radio, 100th anniversary of first ever United States movie theaters by Bob Mondello. The sound of film running through a projector, but they'd heard it in vaudeville houses, sandwiched in between the juggler and the comedy act, ghostly shadows flickering on a white sheet draped over a pole. Patrons could barely make out the image of a couple dancing to an orchestra no one could hear, or a man sneezing. But the mere fact that they moved was kind of a miracle then. Only later did it occur to anyone to use these shadows to tell a story. Multiple reel films had appeared in the United States as early as 1907. The Birth of a Nation is a landmark of film history. It was the first 12-reel film ever made at 3 hours, and also the longest up to that point. It was originally shown in 2 parts, separated by another movie innovation, The Intermission, and it was the first to have a musical score for an orchestra. So basically, the early silent films in the theater, in the corner, would be a piano player that would play along to the music to give it background sound. It was the first American motion picture to be screened in the White House, viewed there by President Woodrow Wilson. The film was controversial even before its release, and has remained so ever since. It has been called the most controversial film ever made in the United States. The film portrays African Americans, many of whom were played by white actors in blackface, as unintelligent and aggressive toward white women. The film represents the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan, as a heroic force necessary to preserve American values and a white supremacist social order. In response to the film's depictions of Black people and Civil War history, African Americans across the nation organized and participated in protests against the birth of a nation. In such places as in Boston, where thousands of white people viewed the film, Black leaders tried to have it banned on the basis that it inflamed racial tensions and could incite violence. The NAACP spearheaded an unsuccessful campaign to ban the film. In spite of its divisiveness, The Birth of a Nation was a huge commercial success and profoundly influenced both the film industry and American culture. The film has been acknowledged as an inspiration for the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan KKK, which took place only a few months after its release. So during Reconstruction, after the Civil War, white plantation owners and farmers protested against having Northerners called carpetbaggers come down to the South and start running the show there. So they formed a group. They wore white sheets and white hoods, and they were called the Ku Klux Klan. And it eventually kind of not really died out totally, but was pretty less in numbers. But again, after the release of this film, the organization grew again as a direct result of Birth of a Nation. So the first Klan was established in the wake of the Civil War and was a defining organization of the Reconstruction era. Organized entirely in the southern United States, the KKK, or the Klan, is an American white supremacist hate group whose primary targets are African Americans, but not just limited to African Americans. They also disliked Jewish people, immigrants, leftists, homosexuals, Muslims, and even Catholics. In 1927, the first talkie is released. Previous films had been released with sounds on discs, but the jazz singer was the first to have dialogue synchronized during a film. It changed the game forever. 1933, we see the first drive-in movie theaters opening in New Jersey. People could sit in the comfort of their own cars to watch movies. And this lasted probably until the 70s, maybe into the 80s. It kind of died out. But recently, people are thinking about opening up these venues again, where you take your car, drive it into a parking area. You have a speaker that is connected to your car window. The refreshments are served, and you can watch a movie from the convenience of your own car. 1953, first movie theaters have what's called stereophonic sound alongside a giant screen. This is the beginning of the modern movie theater era. And interesting to note that movie theaters have stayed about the same for the past 50 years or so. So that's our small piece on movies and movie theaters. Okay, so our next slide is about supermarkets. We talked about this a little earlier when we discussed the development of the suburb. Okay, so the first self-service grocery store was named Piggly Wiggly, and that was in 1916 in Memphis, Tennessee, developed by Clarence Saunders. A replica of the original store has been constructed as a museum, and a mansion that Saunders built as his private residence was later sold to the city, celebrating the first grocery store of the time. At the time of its founding, grocery stores did not allow the customers to gather their own goods. Instead, a customer would give a list of items to a clerk, who would then go through the store gathering them. This created a greater cost and therefore higher prices. Piggly Wiggly introduced the innovation of allowing customers to go through the store, gathering their own goods, thus cutting costs and lowering prices. Losses due to easier shoplifting or theft were more than offset by the profits from increased impulse purchasing. Others were initially experimenting with this format as well, which initially became known as the Groceteria, reminded people of cafeterias, another relatively new self-service idea. So from an article, The History of the Supermarket in America by Kelsey Trinidad, goes to say the 1930 opening of the first King Cullen supermarket started the redefining of what a grocery market experience could be. Instead of the usual offering of dry goods, King Cullen offered the convenience of thousands of products, not only in one location, but under one roof. For the first time, a grocery store offered a bakery department with fresh baked bread, a meat department with an on-staff butcher, and an expansive product department, all available for purchase through one checkout line. While this may not seem extraordinary by today's standards, this was the first of many supermarkets that offered such a variety of products in one store. Since then, we've developed a number of conveniences and technologies that have evolved the supermarket past its bare-bones structure. The invention of the shopping cart came shortly after in 1937 and was vital to efficient and profitable shopping within the supersized grocery landscape. 1974, the price scanner, a technology that would significantly cut down waiting times at the checkout lines to this day, was first installed. Most recently, in 2020, Amazon opened its first cashier-less Amazon Go grocery store in Seattle, Washington, taking its completely staffless convenience store model and applying it to the supermarket scale. Other things that are popular today is the grocery store delivery. You can order online and have it delivered right to your door. So we've seen a big change in supermarkets. Again, main themes: ease, convenience, in, out, get it quickly, not having to spend hours going from place to place to get your weekly items of food. Grocery stores today can also have a pharmacy inside of it. Some even have banks, a place where you can buy alcohol, all under one roof. Part of modern conveniences. Okay, so our next slide is about ice hockey. The first known formal game of ice hockey in the United States was played between Yale University and Johns Hopkins University in 1893 and is considered to be the start of present-day ice hockey in America. In 1924, the Boston Bruins were the first American team to join the National Hockey League. During the season, the first NHL game was played in the United States, where the Boston Bruins defeated the Montreal Maroons 2-1. That same season, the NHL increased the season schedule from 24 to 30 games. 3 more American teams, the New York Rangers, Chicago Blackhawks, and Detroit Cougars, joined the NHL in 1926. The Stanley Cup is the oldest trophy in North American sports. A hockey tournament debuted in the Summer Olympics in 1920 and will later also be recognized as the first ice hockey championship. Canada took the gold medal, with the United States getting the silver. A movie called Miracle is a 2004 American sports film about the United States men's ice hockey team led by head coach Herb Brooks, portrayed by Kurt Russell, that won the gold medal in the 1980 Winter Olympics. The American team's victory over the heavily favored Soviet professionals in the medal round was dubbed the Miracle on Ice. The legacy of the Miracle on Ice is believed to be influential in popularizing the sport from a fringe sport to a mainstream sport. So that's a quick influence of hockey, which actually started in Canada, quickly made its way to USA. Okay, on this slide we want to talk about Walt Disney. Walt Disney Company is founded from history.com. This day in history, October 16th, 1923. Walt Disney and his brother Roy founded the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio in Hollywood, California. The studio, now known as the Walt Disney Company, has had an oversized impact on the entertainment industry and is now one of the largest media companies in the world. A talented artist from a young age, Walt Disney drew cartoons for various publications and became interested in animation while working for the Kansas City Film Ad Company. After his Laugh-O-Gram studio went bankrupt in 1923, Disney moved to Los Angeles, where his brother Roy was recovering from tuberculosis. While there, he finally sold a short film produced by Laugh-O-Gram called Alice's Wonderland, and signed a contract to make 6 more such films. In order to produce the series, the brothers founded their company and persuaded Virginia Davis, who played Alice, to join them in Hollywood. After the success of Alice in Wonderland series, Disney developed a new character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And if you look at it, it looks like the beginnings of Mickey Mouse. Disney began work on his most famous creation with the 1928 release of Steamboat Willie. The world was introduced to Mickey Mouse. The character would go on to become one of, if not the most recognizable cartoons in history. The popularity of Mickey Mouse shorts convinced Disney his studio could produce a feature film, which he began to do in 1934. The project was dubbed Disney's Folly. It went 400% over budget, required over 300 animators, artists, and assistants. But Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a smash hit when it debuted just before Christmas in 1937. 1950, Cinderella becomes Disney's successful animated feature, followed by Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Treasure Island. 1955, Lady and the Tramp becomes a smash hit. In 1955, Disney also creates a TV series called The Mickey Mouse Club. 1964, Mary Poppins wins Academy Awards. Disney is presented the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award, from President Johnson. 1965, Disney Studios purchases land in Orlando, Florida, as a copy of his first entertainment park in California called Disneyland. In 1965, he starts Disney World. In 1966, Walt Disney passes away and never sees the completion of his Disney World project. Okay, so let's take a look at a quick video on the biography of Walt Disney. Okay, our next piece is on Time Magazine. Time Magazine is an American weekly news magazine and news website published in New York City. It was founded in 1923. Time has the world's largest circulation for a weekly news magazine. It also has the Person of the Year. Time's most famous feature throughout its history has been the annual Person of the Year, formerly Man of the Year, cover story, in which Time recognizes the individual or group of individuals who have had the biggest impact on news headlines over the past 12 months. The distinction is supposed to go to the person who, for good or ill, has most affected the course of the year. It is therefore not necessarily an honor or a reward. Time Magazine also has a version for kids. It's called Time for Kids, and is a division of the magazine that is especially published for children and is mainly distributed in classrooms. Time for Kids contains a national news, a cartoon of the week, and a variety of articles concerning popular culture. An annual issue concerning the environment is distributed near the end of the U.S. school term. The publication rarely exceeds 10 pages, front and back. Sidebar note, the use of Time Magazine as a study guide for English language tests, vocabulary, reading, comprehension, and writing model. They say that students who read Time Magazine score higher on the TOEFL exam, the TOEIC exam, the GRE, and all of those academic English tests. So a really good way to improve your English is by reading Time Magazine. Our next slide is about Clarence Birdseye from Birdseye Frozen Foods. We do have a video clip at the end of this segment, 1960s Birdseye commercial. So take a look at that. Okay, so Clarence Birdseye is born in 1886 and he passes away in 1956. Was an American inventor, entrepreneur, and naturalist. Considered the founder of the modern frozen food industry. People have been freezing foods as a means of preservation since the early 1000 BC, when the Chinese stored goods in ice cellars. Birdseye figured out the logistics of selling frozen foods. How could he freeze it so fast so it didn't deform the food tissue? How would he package it? And how would he transport the product? So he gets an engineering degree, and he travels to the province of Labrador in northern eastern Canada. And he would often freeze his catch after a day of fishing to keep it fresh. He learned from the Inuit, the local native population, who would fish from holes in the ice and let it freeze instantly in the frigid temperatures. Mark Kurlansky writes in Birdseye, The Adventures of a Curious Man, Birdseye noticed that when the fish thawed, it wasn't mushy like other frozen foods he had tried before. This was around 1912. Frozen food was invented by Clarence Birdseye in the 1920s. Frozen food helped people by making cooking easier and more affordable for people. It also made it possible for people to access certain foods year-round and to have access to food from all over the country. In the 1950s, along with the growth of supermarkets and advancements in freezing and refrigeration, frozen foods, including newly created TV dinners, had become, by the 1950s, a staple of the American diet. Today, the global food industry is valued in the neighborhood of $250 billion. We have another video clip of the TV dinner, what that looked like, and how that was promoted on television in 1955. So let's take a look at that. So, along with Clarence Birdseye's production of frozen foods comes the icebox. And in 1927, the company marketed a refrigerator with the compressor mounted on top. The unit quickly gained the name monitor top because of the top-mounted refrigeration compressor resembled the gun turret on the Civil War ironclad ship named the USS Monitor. The refrigerator entered the market with a price tag around $525, but within a few years, models were selling as low as $200, making GE's top refrigerators affordable for many Americans. Before this, Refrigerators were ice boxes where a weekly delivery of ice was delivered to the home and placed into the box. This is from how the kitchen changed through time as a result of GE's refrigerator. The design of the American kitchen changed drastically. This is from the Daring Gourmet, The Evolution of the American Kitchen by Kimberly, no last name, at daringgourmet.com. Okay, so Kimberly says, kitchens tell us so much about the prevailing culture and are a reflection of its values and philosophies. And so it's no wonder that as people and cultures have changed, so have their kitchens. The American kitchen is no exception. As the needs of American families have changed, and with the emergence of technological advances, the American kitchen has undergone many transformations since its earliest days. In the 1900s, the early American kitchen was far from a social space as it is now. The kitchen also served as a utilitarian workroom and often contained the sewing machine and laundry. It was usually a dark and dreary room located out of sight at the back of the home where the mother would spend her whole day working. 1910, kitchens still doubled as the utility workroom, but by now had the addition of a very heavy cast iron stove, a sink, and an icebox. In 1920, a little style began to be added to the kitchens. Sanitation was a major emphasis of the 1920s, and many of the newspaper and magazine ads focused on food safety and kitchen hygiene. Another big emphasis in the 20s was efficiency through organization. In the 1930s, kitchens were often colorful with bright linoleum and dinnerware. The refrigerator was introduced, the first refrigerator that held food in the door, and a design that continued in use today. Kitchens began to adopt a greater element of fun. In the 1940s, the war is over, and people feel even more inspired to cheer things up. Though most American kitchens are still white, two-toned kitchens such as yellow and blue and bright red become popular. Instead of freestanding kitchen cabinets, were starting to be built into the walls, and refrigerators were becoming more accessible to the middle class. 1950s, the kitchen also sees a structural change. No longer relegated to the back of the home, it's now becoming the shining star of the house. It's located more at the forefront, where the homemaker can interact with members of the family in the living areas. Refrigerators come with the first ice makers and automatic defrosters. Appliances such as handheld mixers, toaster ovens, milkshake makers, and stand mixers enter the market. Electric stoves are common and available in virtually every color of the rainbow. 1960s, during this era of the feminist movement, and as more women joined the workforce, it is no wonder that more time-saving appliances took to the market. Garbage disposals, dishwashers, refrigerators with freezers, and more storage space were gaining popularity. In the 1970s, the microwave is introduced, as well as kitchen islands and raised bars. In 1980, by this time, kitchens have become the heart of the home. As such, they have significantly increased in size. More kitchens are displaying things like cookbook shelves, pegboards, wine and pot racks. With the introduction of more celebrity cooks on TV, kitchens are becoming more and more equipped to show off to guests. In 1990, entertaining becomes more popular, and consequently, kitchens become more comfortable, larger, and flow into the family room to provide greater space for entertaining the guests. The open floor plan becomes increasingly popular. Kitchen islands have become all the rage and enable the host to entertain while preparing the meal. Ivory-colored appliances have moved out, but white and black are still the most common, with stainless steel surfacing more towards the end of the decade. Vinyl flooring is out, replaced with tile or wooden floors. In the 2000s, stainless steel is a must, and the decor is simple and uncluttered. Granite countertops are all the rage, as are large kitchen islands with built-in stoves. Again, kitchens are built for entertaining. This is also the decade for kitchen gadgets, and there is virtually an unlimited selection on the market. Everything from bread makers to rice steamers, and of course, the best food processors and stand mixers take their place prominently on the countertop. 2010, the era of the trophy kitchen. Sleek and uncluttered are the only rules as more people branch into the eclectic look. Kitchens feature massive range hoods for an upscale feel. High-end sophisticated appliances like high-speed ovens were introduced. Induction cooktops to impress visitors and project social status. There is also a huge emphasis on lighting, with recessed cabinet lights and dropped lighting over the kitchen islands. Cabinets extend to the ceiling for a greater feel of grandeur. Lavish pantries are a must, and no luxury is overlooked, including built-in flat-screen TVs for watching all your favorite cooking shows. The goal is aesthetic perfection combined with ultimate functionality. In short, kitchens have become a status symbol. So take a look at the pictures on this slide. You can see the opulent kitchen that is reserved for people with lots of money. Do most people have kitchens like this in the United States? No. Somewhat of a smaller version of that, yes. But the picture that we show here that's for the super wealthy and not the average common man. But as you can see, the kitchen was way back in the day, kind of hidden way back, a utilitarian room at the back of the house, and it has now become an entertainment center. Okay, let's move on to our next slide from here. Okay, so on this slide here, let's talk about the beginnings of what we call today junk food. In an age of health-conscious consumers, low-carb diets, and bottled water, one snack that has stood the test of time, the Twinkie, is an icon of junk food snacks and guilty pleasures, nutritionally worthless, yet irresistibly yummy. Well, that's up for debate. According to an article in the New York Times, let us now praise the great men of junk food. The history of junk food is largely an American tale. It has been around for hundreds of years in many parts of the world, but no one has done a better job inventing so many varieties of it, branding it, mass-producing it, and making people rich off of it, and of course, eating it. Cracker Jack, the candy-coated popcorn and peanuts confection, is credited as the first popular name brand junk food. It was created in Chicago in 1896 and has become the best-selling candy in the world 20 years later. Popularity and appeal. Junk food in its various forms is extremely popular and an integral part of modern popular culture. In the United States, annual fast food sales are in the area of $160 billion compared to the supermarket sales of $620 billion, a figure which also includes junk food in the form of convenience foods, snack foods, and candy. And as we discussed with the TV dinners, in 1976, the U.S. top 10 pop song, Junk Food Junkie, described a junk food addict who pretends to follow a healthy diet by day, while at night gorges on Hostess Twinkies and Fritos corn chips, McDonald's and KFC hamburgers, and Kentucky Fried Chicken. 36 years later, Time placed the Twinkie at number one in an article entitled Top 10 Iconic Junk Foods. Not only a mainstay on our supermarket shelves and in our bellies, they've been a staple in our popular culture and above all in our hearts. Often criticized for its lack of any nutritional value whatsoever, the Twinkie has managed to persevere as a cultural and gastronomic icon. And as a result of junk food into the present day, there's been a backlash, rightfully so. One method was through taxing higher tax on those kinds of junk food, and a major restriction on advertising to children. If you're an adult and you want to eat that kind of thing, great, but this is not a good idea for kids. In 1976, a chemistry teacher by the name of Roger Benatti took a freshly unwrapped Twinkie as an experiment to further his students' science education and placed it on top of a chalkboard in his classroom. Benetti wanted to see how long it would take to decompose. Well, that Twinkie is still intact 40 years later. The Twinkie now sits in a glass case in the office of the dean at George Stevens Academy in Blue Hill, Maine. The Twinkie has zero mold, and it has even retained its original shape. If anything was learned by this multiple decade-long experiment, it is that preservatives do work and work well. Over the years, students have often asked to take a bite of the Twinkie, but many have said if given the chance to indulge in the old treat, they would pass. I mean, come on, this thing is 40 years old. So, yep, junk food maybe didn't begin in America, but it was certainly perfected to an art. It made a lot of people rich. But now, today, it has been kind of pushed out of its position in families definitely want their kids eating a much healthier, more balanced diet. So that's about it for today. We've run out of time. We'll continue our historic look at American popular culture next week. We should start to think about our research paper coming up in about 4 weeks. Our first one, a reminder, it's a biographical research paper, someone connected to popular culture. Can be anyone you choose. I have given you a list to look at. So in addition to our usual homework for this week, I want you to think about 3 people that you would like to research, and drop that in your email homework response to me. And again, as we always say, try to make it connect to you in some way. Find a personality or a person that you want to do your biographical research on that connects to you in some way. Maybe your classes that you're taking, or maybe your job, or maybe your hobby, or someone that shares an interest that you have an interest in. So this makes it a more realistic assignment if you can connect it to you. So that's it for today. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.